the last segment of my presentation. This is the last segment of my presentation. So now I'm going to talk about due process. Due process is the legal principle. This is the principle or legal doctrine for limiting the arbitrariness of officials. This is mentioned twice in the Constitution. The first time it is mentioned is in the Fifth Amendment, where it says, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." The second time it is mentioned is in the 14th Amendment, when it says, "No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." So the concept of due process of law has a broad and flexible meaning. The definition can vary depending on the situation that it's used in. The core idea of due process is the idea that due process is a fundamental fairness to the extent that a person should always be given notice of their charges that are brought against him or her, that a person should be provided a real chance to present their side of a legal dispute, and that no law or government should be arbitrary. The specific requirements that are needed for due process are varying depending on what the Supreme Court's latest interpretation of the Bill of Rights is. Speaking of the Bill of Rights, that's what I'll be talking about next. So I'm going to start from the beginning. The main issue with getting the Constitution ratified was the absence of the protection of individual rights. This is because the main leaders of the American Revolution opposed the Constitution for fear that the proposed national government would have the same threat to the rights of the average American that the King of England did. Because of this fear, this is why we adopted the Bill of Rights. And specifically, the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments relate to criminal procedure. The protections of the Bill of Rights originally were only restricted the national government. It wasn't until the legal doctrine called selective incorporation that the Supreme Court ruled that the due process clause of the 14th Amendment made provisions of the Bill of Rights applicable to the states. Specifically, the 4th Amendment, which it restricts searches and seizures. The 5th Amendment, which is the right to not self-incriminate. The 6th Amendment, which is the right to counsel and right to trial by jury. And the 8th Amendment, which is the right against cruel and unusual punishment. Next, I'm going to introduce, I'm going to do an introduction into criminal law. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about civil law, just so we can compare and contrast the differences. So for civil law, the first main difference is that the disputes are brought by the plaintiff. Most disputes that go to court are civil law, and they involve private parties. Civil law often involves things like contracts, torts, domestic relations, property, and things like that. And when there are breaches to civil law, the only penalties, it is only considered private matters, and the only penalties are usually monetary compensation. With criminal law, criminal law relates to actions that are considered so dangerous or so potentially dangerous that they threaten the welfare of society. So instead of a plaintiff bringing a dispute forward or a claim forward, the prosecution brings a case forward. So the prosecution is the state, and the state prosecutes the defendants for violations of public wrongs, which are laws. The defendants, if found guilty, are often punished as well in these cases. There are distinctions made within the law depending on the seriousness of the offense. So the first offense that you can do is a felony. Felonies are the most serious offenses, and in most states, they are punishable by 1 year or more in prison. The next one are misdemeanors, which are less serious than felonies, and they are generally punishable by up to 1 year in a local jail. And the last violation you can make are violations, and they are the least serious offense, and they are usually subject to fines or very short jail terms. An important thing to note is that criminal law is meant to supplement civil law. For example, this means that a person can be prosecuted criminally and a victim can seek damages within the means of civil law for the same act. For example, if a drunk driver gets prosecuted criminally and they are found guilty, the victim of the drunk driver can sue them to seek monetary damages for what could have been like car damage. Next,